Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Mary Doogan, a Senior Labour Ward Midwife from Glasgow, Scotland. Mary, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Gavin.
Now, last time we interviewed you, we learned a little bit about you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, today we're going to look at why did you travel all those miles from Glasgow to Australia? Tell me, why bother?
Well, it was a series of circumstances. I have a very good friend back home who does spiritual artwork, a lad called Tommy Canning. And Tommy's been out here on a number of trips with his work on Divine Mercy, particular apostolate. And he spoke to me a couple of years ago during one of his trips, and he was in a Catholic church. And he said at the back of the church there was a bulletin, and in the bulletin there were a request for prayers for the Scottish midwives. So anyway, he spoke to John Canavan, who's a great promoter of all sorts of things, but John's one of these lives activists, and I think he's fairly well known here. So John thought it would be good to bring me out to the pro-life body of people, or through that organisation. So, as I say, it was first mentioned about 2 years ago, and I didn't give it an awful lot of thought at the time, but just earlier this year there was a very definite request to come. So basically it was through Tommy's connection and John Canavan.
Now, does it surprise you that not everybody's just pro-life?
Well,
aren't we all breathing?
Yeah, correct. It's one of these things I often think about, and I think it's just it's a nonsense that we actually have to label ourselves, because I really believe that you have to learn to be the opposite of pro-life. I think being pro-life, as you say, you're breathing, you're living, we're alive. So you're for life in that respect. So I think you have to default from that if you want to take an opposite view. And for me, it's the natural position to be. As I said to some people, children and young people are instinctively pro-life, unless there's something really, really seriously wrong in their lives. Then children and young adults are naturally that way inclined. It's life that sort of teaches them another path. But that's my belief anyway.
Yes. So here you are in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And we're told in Scripture that joy comes in the morning and there's enough grace and mercy and love for the day. How's your day going?
Oh, well, today's lovely. It's nice and fresh. It's like an autumn day back home, a really lovely autumn day back in Scotland. So it's beautiful, and when the weather's lovely, you feel joyful yourself. But I'm joyful because I had no expectations at all. There was a blank sheet about coming to Australia, and didn't know an awful lot of what to expect. But the number of people I've met who've been so kind, so warm, and so committed to helping others, really, which is what it's all about. That's been a great joy. And the bottom line is people are the same the world over. And so many people have taken me into really their family situations. And that's been a really, really wonderful thing to experience. There's too many to name, but that's been a joyful thing to experience, yes.
What's the international experience been like in Australia?
I feel as if I'm meeting the world here in Australia. You know, you can read about places and you can be aware that, its location would attract people from Asia and America or wherever. And we all know that the UK and the Irish history, but it's all the other nationalities. It's just so international. Mm-hmm. Probably the most international place I've been, and I've been throughout America as well. So I'm quite astonished at the variety that's here.
With that diversity, is the message you have so diverse?
It's not really. It's the same as back home, and I feel that the meetings I've been to and the people I've met, they're a cross section of the whole community. And but apart from perhaps our skin colour, our genetic makeup, we're actually the same deep down. So folk are really the same the world over, And the ones I have met, they've been diverse like Australia, a cross-section of Australia. But basically we're no different back home.
Now, you've come to talk about laws that were changed in Great Britain.
Yeah.
What's happening here? What are the similarities?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why some of the organisations were very keen to bring me out, because there have been very restrictive laws enforced here in Victoria. I think it's since 2008, and my understanding is it's very prohibitive, if not eradicated altogether, the rights to conscience, which I find really, really appalling.
Well, let's take the word, this right to conscience. Now, I have a right to object serving in a war zone. I have a right to choose not to disturb the animal kingdom and just stick to vegetation as it grows in its different forms.
Yes, that's right.
So what's happening here? Where's the contradiction?
I think we're being very selective about what we will allow as a conscience vote, which should worry many, many people. It really should, because your conscience is decided by your individual conscience, a person's own conscience, and that's why it's very hard to say this is the conscience, you can do this and you don't do that, because every one of us, it's our conscience has to be informed. So how far or how near we decide to draw the line is a very, very personal thing. But even though that may be quite difficult to grasp on its own, what's happening with the courts is that they're really eradicating it altogether and still calling it conscience, which it's not. It's not. It's a right to conscience. But as you say, those examples you've given, if it suits people who will abuse their power, then they will restrict conscience in very many other areas once they've done it in one area. That's what I've come to learn.
So it's an imposition?
I think so, absolutely. Yes.
And how do you find Australians responding to this conscience messing?
Well, because the law here has become very restrictive, I think 2008, some people, the same as back home, some people are aware of the seriousness of that. And I believe that in other states you have got bodies of people that are working hard to protect their conscience rights. Now, maybe it's just caught people off guard at the way it's come in. And I don't know enough about the history or whatever, but I just know that if I was working in this environment, I would be screaming from the rafters that I would not actually agree to what they're imposing.
All right, well, let's hold that thought. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Mary Doogan, a Senior Labour Ward Midwife from Glasgow, Scotland. Mary, we were talking about this imposed conscience. Where are we going with this? I mean, are people confused because they're not informed? What's happening?
I think people are sleepwalking. You know, that's my belief. There have been periods of political situations in the near past where, and in other countries as we speak, where it's quite extraordinary how masses of people can actually just be led along by a few people who are very committed to a particular cause or ideology. And I think that's actually happening in our societies just now. We may think we're free, but I don't think we're as free as we actually are. And back home, there are people who would not be of my viewpoint on the matter of conscience, specifically to do with abortion issue, but they would be very supportive of our rights to express our viewpoint. This includes people who are very socialist-minded, who are atheists, but they're really quite appalled at potentially what's happening here. And they see the writing on the wall. So it could lead, doesn't have to, but it could lead to a dictatorship where you're told you do this or you're not going to be employed, which is what's happening to myself and my colleague. But I think that's a real danger here as well.
Yes. So you met a doctor or two who their right to practice is being challenged, is that right?
Yes, Dr. Hobart is a doctor I met here in Victoria, and I learned about him. I'd heard actually about 3 years ago about how he had resisted the request to refer a woman on to have an abortion for whatever reason, but the point is his conscience was saying no to this, and I believe he had a very, very difficult time, which is very, very unfortunate, but because basically he was exercising his right of conscience, which has been there. It's not a religious thing, it goes way beyond or before the time of Christ. So it's not a religious issue, and anybody and everybody has a right to access their conscience viewpoint. So yes, I met a few who are finding it very difficult actually to work in the health service now because the restrictions that are being placed upon them from higher authorities.
So this is a different form of dehumanising.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I know from my work that what we have to do, that particular task and activity, you have to dehumanise your own feelings, and the people that are involved in this have to do that in order to see the procedure through. So being a doctor or being a nurse or being a midwife can dehumanise you anyway, because there's a lot of pain and suffering, and there's times you have to actually, it's not that you're ignoring it, but you can't actually stop pain and suffering, but you've just got to move through or even impose that sometimes in activities that we do. So we have a measure of, maybe it is dehumanising, as a doctor once says to me, but the same token we're trained and we know, because we've got a heart to do it, is to be compassionate when it's going to harm for the wrong reasons. So we may impose pain by what we have to do, but the real aim is to actually achieve a healthier outcome for this person. So it's...
So I've used the word dehumanising. What about putting another word in its place, desensitising? What are we losing in this battle?
Well, at the moment, people are very desensitised, and I think that's got a lot to do with maybe the culture we've been living in for the past 20 years or so. You know, the fact that media puts across a lot of violent imagery, whether it's real, and there's some horrific images coming from certain parts of the world, the cruelty of man to man, which is just dreadful. I think that contributes to the dehumanisation of young people in particular, but it doesn't stop the pain that we all feel. But they can be desensitised to the emotional. In fact, now that you're speaking about this, I heard a priest the other day, they're talking about lepers, and how in leprosy, of course, it numbs all the senses of feeling. So the person is left with no feeling whatsoever. And I think that you can have a spiritual leprosy where you don't feel the emotions, and you can be shut down to that. I've come across that a lot, actually.
Yes. Now let's move the spiritual out and come back to Mr. and Mrs. Average. They're being desensitised that their emotions, you know, the nerve ends for compassion, the nerve ends for empathy, are being removed, aren't they?
Well, I think they are. I think they are. But maybe they don't see it. You know, somebody I was talking to recently, she was having a discussion with somebody, and it got onto emotional aspects, and she asked the question of this boy, but what about the heart? And he just said, oh, that's just a muscle. Now, I would have asked the question after that, is that all your mother's heart was for you? A muscle? So that tells me that person perhaps has not had as much emotional love as perhaps some of us have.
All right.
You know, so...
Is it close to the bone when we say, I can be opinionated, but that's not based on experience, and it's not based on having contact with love or grace or mercy or compassion. So an opinion can be quite cold, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And everybody's got an opinion. There's a lot of me, my, I in our vocabulary today, but that's often all it is. And I think some people would like to just think that some of what we do today is a painless activity. It's got no repercussions, and that's not true at all. There's a lot of...
Well, on that thought, you're watching Support Life, and we will be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Mary Doogan, a Senior Labour Ward Midwife from Glasgow, Scotland. Mary, there's 7 minutes to go, and I'm not going to ask you any questions at all. This is your 7 minutes. You're back to Scotland soon. What do you want to say to our audience?
Well, what I would like to say is probably what I would like to say to anybody anywhere. And the reason I'm here is obviously because there was a judgment made which meant that those of us who have conscientious objection against the activity of abortion cannot exercise that now. So wherever those dangers exist, which is a violation of our free will, I would encourage people to resist that in whatever way they can. It can be done politically, it can be done through various sources of communication, but people have to stand up and realise that there is great danger to the dictatorships that are out there and that are not far from our shores at this moment in time. So we know ourselves in our heart of hearts what's right and what's wrong. And to be forced by any government, any body, any king or any emperor to go against their conscience is just not acceptable. So I would encourage people to be true and faithful and not to be afraid. Not to be afraid, because no matter how difficult the journey may be, and it has been very difficult, there's no question about it, it has been a very costly exercise, but throughout the difficulties there hasn't been one time when I felt, no, I can't do this. So God gives you incredible strength, no matter what that cross may be. As I say, mine happens to have been this issue over the rights of conscience back in the UK, but the audience, every single person will have some cross or other, and so not to be afraid of the cross, however that's going to manifest itself, and to help and support one another, and do it through love. There's no need to be judgmental towards anyone, but there's no, you've got to realise as well that if we take a stand on moral issues today, which are going against the grain of how some people want the world to be, we'll be judged and judged severely, actually. But just to accept that, because the truth has an incredible power of its own, and no matter how many people may seem to be against or opposed to you at this moment in time, the truth will get through, and eventually the majority of people will understand that and will desire truth.
So when a person does stand for something that's right, and what we're standing for is to exercise, using free will, your conscience, that we all have.
Yes.
We have an innate understanding of right and wrong. To lose that expression, to express our conscience, is a great loss. So it's not just about abortion. Oh,
absolutely not. That's my point. It can be used to justify forcing people to do anything. I mean, as you said earlier on, that if you were a vegetarian and for some reason you were to eat meat, or they wanted you to eat meat, people would be up in arms about that. You can take the whole issue of the animal rights issue, which many people find abhorrent. But if they forced you to do that, to take part and say that was okay, against your own conscience, people would be up in arms. So it's not just to do with the abortion issue. In fact, the argument we've had, the issue has been on conscience. It's about abortion, but the issue is conscience. And as I've said many times, it's a real insult to atheists to suggest that they don't have a conscience. I find that I would be very, very offended if I happened not to believe. And I have got friends who have also supported us, who are atheists, and who recognise this is just an inalienable right within us all to exercise.
So this is love and grace in action. What we're appealing to those who are watching is exercise your conscience, and we're there for one another. We're not again, as they say, anybody.
Right.
It's just you need the freedom to express what it is that's important to you.
Yeah, that's right. And it is a free society when you are allowed to do that. That is the case. But the converse of that is it becomes a dictatorship, a relative dictatorship, and history teaches where that leads to, and that's a worrying development. But again, I would say, be true to your heart, be true to your conscience, and don't ignore what your conscience tells you. And ask for God's guidance. This is a spiritual programme, so He's the one that's in charge, and He'll give you the grace and the help that you need to do that.
Yes. We've talked about our own innate weaknesses, and we all have an Achilles heel. If we just conversed with one another over coffee, we all acknowledge that there are things that I'm not perfect.
Yes, oh yes.
Now, you've met lots of children here in Australia. What do children teach you?
Oh, children teach me the truth. They tell you as it is, and that's gorgeous. And they have to learn to be devious, I think. They might start showing these signs early on, but basically, I absolutely love children. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think if a child is spoiled or ruined, as we say back home, I don't know if you use those expressions here, then a child can become unpopular. And I think that's an awful sad thing to happen, because children have got so much to teach us, and it's their spontaneity, their natural inclinations, and they're just so frank about it. And that's just wonderful. And they allow you to be a child again. You know, they can accept stupid things you say and silly things you say, and you're going back into your own childhood with them, and that's why I love children. They're wonderful.
I think sometimes we need to reclaim our childhood, to be childlike and not childish.
Yeah, well, a psychiatrist from Canada once says that when they talk about people as they get old going into their second childhood, and he said it's not really that they're going into the second childhood, they've never left their first. And I think that's right. I think there's a period of time, maybe in your late teens and right through until 65 onwards, and then you start taking off that mask again and being the person you really are.
Well, I'm playing model trains, so what does that say?
Yeah, it says you're enjoying yourself.
I am. Well, for those who are watching, Mary, we thank you for visiting us.
It's been my
our
pleasure.
Shores. And we thank you for stirring our conscience.
Praise God.
You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.